Chapter 3, Resources and Living Things, Lesson 2, Introduction to Natural Resources. After this lesson, y'all be able to explain what natural resources are and distinguish between renewable and non-renewable resources, and explain why natural resources are important. My Planet Diary. It was a spring without voices. On the mornings that had once throbbed with the dawn chorus of robins, there was now no sound. Only silence lay over the fields and woods and marsh. Rachel Carson. In the 20th century, farmers began to use chemicals to fight insects that killed their crops. People didn't realize that these chemicals were hurting other animals as well. Rachel Carson, born in 1907, was a scientist who wrote about sea life and nature. Carson began to worry about these chemicals. In 1962, she wrote the book Silent Spring. She explained what was happening to animals on land, in the air, and in the sea. Today, more people are careful to protect living things. So they ask, what dangers did Rachel Carson warn people about? Well, she probably warned people about the effects of chemicals on the various animals that were being affected by the chemicals. Number 2 says, do you think the spring Carson wrote about would look different now that some harmful chemicals are banned? Why or why not? Well, I'd say that, yeah, probably it would look different. She read about how there was no sound, that nothing happening. You didn't get to hear the birds. I'd say that probably the animals and plants would have returned by now. It's been 1962 to 2020, however many years that is, over 50. The animals probably would have returned, but that's just my opinion. What are natural resources? Did you turn on a light or use an alarm clock today? Flush a toilet or take a shower? Ride in a car or bus? Eat some food? Use any paper other than this page that you are reading right now, except I'm reading from my book and you're not? All of these things and so much more depend on Earth's resources. Recall that anything that occurs naturally in the environment and is used by people is called a natural resource. Natural resources include organisms, water, sunlight, minerals, and oil. A renewable resource is either always available or is naturally replaced in a relatively short time. Some renewable resources, like wind and sunlight, are almost always available. Other renewable resources, like water and trees, are renewable only if they are replaced as fast as they are used. So down here we have a picture. Let me scroll. It says the trees in the first diagram are being harvested for wood. The landowner tells you that the trees are a renewable resource. Based on the number of trees being harvested and replanted, is the landowner right? So we have our first picture is the original trees on land. We've got maybe 10, I don't know, I didn't count them. The second picture, we have our first harvest. So they chopped down 70% of those trees. We've got 3 left. And then after replanting, it looks like we have maybe 7 trees. So is the landowner correct in saying that it's a renewable resource? In this instance, no, the landowner is wrong. So these trees are not being treated as a renewable resource. They are being used faster than they are being replanted. Now let's say he cut down these trees, there were 3 left, and he planted 10 more. Well, then it would be a renewable resource, because then he's planting more than he is using. Over millions of years, natural processes changed the remains of organisms into the substance now called oil and coal. Today's world is powered by these fuels. Humans use these resources much faster than they are naturally replaced. Resources that are not replaced in a useful time frame are non-renewable resources. Metals and minerals are also non-renewable. Remember that some resources, such as trees, may be renewable or non-renewable depending on how quickly they are replaced. So renewable resource means that within a short period of time, we will have that resource again. If we need wind energy to power our wind turbines, that's a renewable resource. The wind is almost constantly blowing, and if it stops blowing for a day, it'll pick back up the next day. So it's being reused and replenished in a reasonable amount of time. Non-renewable are those that are not replaced, so not renewed, in a useful amount of time. We're using, like if we're using fossil fuel, well, we have our fossils from forever and a half ago, but eventually we're going to run out of fossils, and therefore they're not going to be able to be renewed, at least not in our lifetime, so it's non-renewable, not worth it. Figure 1 says resources are grouped into two main categories, renewable and non-renewable. Gold, shown above in our little pan like they were sifting for gold, is non-renewable. Alright, use what you have read to fill in the table comparing renewable and non-renewable resources. So we have renewable resources, replaced in a short time or always available. What are some examples of this? Well, we know sunlight, wind. Non-renewable resources are not replaced in a useful time frame. That would be things like metals, oil, coal, the gold, minerals, natural gases, fossil fuels. Things that fit both in natural resource categories, so can be renewable, but can also be non-renewable. Trees, sometimes food crops, because if we're planting corn and that's a summer crop, when we get to winter, we're not going to have any corn. Water, especially drinkable water. Okay, Ms. Reams, like, I get it. Renewable and non-renewable resources are natural resources. Cool, but why are they important? Alright, here we go. Humans cannot live without some natural resources, such as sunlight and fresh water. Others, such as metals, are necessary to sustain modern life. Humans depend on Earth's natural resources for survival and for development. There you go. We need the natural resources to stay alive. If we don't have water, we're not going to be able to get our daily intake of water, and we're going to be dehydrated. If we don't have sunlight, we're not going to be able to grow our crops, who also need water in order to eat and not die of starvation. Around the world, people rely on natural resources for the same basic needs. Not all resources are equally available in all parts of the world. In some areas, there is a plentiful supply of clean, fresh water. In other areas, water is scarce, so not really there. In some places, pollution threatens the water supply. Globally, fuels are used for cooking, heating, and power. Different fuels are common in different parts of the world. Coal is plentiful in some areas of the world, and oil is plentiful in others. See Figure 2. In some areas, wood is the main fuel, not coal or oil. So let's take a peek. Let's check out this down here. Boom. So we've got people use natural resources in different ways around the world. In the blank box below, draw or describe one way you use natural resources. Okay, so let's check it. Our first picture we've got says in Sierra Leone, entire communities get their drinking water from a main well. So everybody gets their drinking water from this giant well. In China, coal is delivered to homes by bicycle to be burned for heat. So we've got this guy carrying buckets of coal to all the homes so they can be warm. And you can't see the words at the bottom, but it says in Iceland, most homes get hot water and heat from the energy of the hot liquid-like rock under Earth's surface. That's pretty baller, actually. So all the hot liquid-like rock they drilled down and got, I guess, and that's how they stay warm, because in Iceland, we can assume, kind of cold. So what's a way that you use natural resources? Well, an example could be, oh, Miss Reams, I eat fruits and vegetables from a community garden during the summer. That's cool. Oh, Miss Reams, the bus that brings me to school runs on diesel fuel. That's cool. Also, why do you know what kind of fuel your bus has? That's weird. Unless you asked this morning, your bus driver. Bus driver, what kind of fuel do you use? And he's probably like, I don't know, whichever one's cheapest. How long a resource lasts depends on how people use it. Sustainable use of a resource means using it in ways that maintain the resource at a certain quality for a certain period of time. For example, a city may want to manage a river. Does the city want the water to be clean enough to drink or clean enough to swim in? Does the city want the water to be clean for 50 years, 200 years, or indefinitely? The answers to these questions define what would be considered sustainable use of the river. However, it may not be sustainable from an ecological perspective, even if it meets human needs. Other cities farther down the river may have different answers to those questions, but their plans could also be considered sustainable if they met their goals. Because of the differences, policymakers and lawmakers struggle to define sustainable use. The struggle adds to the challenge of regulating resources. The amount of land and water that individuals use to meet their resources needs and absorb the waste they produce is called an ecological footprint. A high level of resource use means a larger footprint. A low level of resource use means a smaller footprint. So our picture up here says everything you do contributes to your ecological footprint, from how you travel, to the food you eat, to the home you live in. Ecological footprints vary among individuals and among nations depending on how people live. So they're saying that if we can imagine, everything that you do is leaving a mark on something. And because we're usually standing or walking, we call it our footprint. So if you're using a lot of resources, that means that you have a larger footprint. Good or bad, it just means you have a larger footprint. You're making more of an impact on the world, good or bad, by using these resources. If you don't use as many resources, then you're going to have a smaller ecological footprint because you're not impacting the world, good or bad, as much as other people could be. Apply it! The chart below gives the average ecological footprint for the people of several countries. It also gives the footprint for each country as a whole. Ecological footprints are measured in global hectares. A global hectare, or GHA, or GHA, is a unit of area. It is adjusted to compare how much life different places on Earth can support. So our graph, our table below, we have our countries: United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Mexico, and China. Our average ecological footprint, or GHA, per person in those countries, and the total ecological footprint in million GHA for each country. Number 1 says, which country has the largest ecological footprint? So we're talking total. Well, we can see United States has 2,819. Let me get a color, please. United Kingdom has 333. Germany has 375. This is in millions, by the way, so it's 333 million. Mexico has 265, and China has 2,152. So which one has the bigger number? The United States. USA. About how many times larger is the average ecological footprint per person in the United States than per person in Mexico? So now we're looking at per person. So we're looking at this 9.6 here and Mexico's 2.6 here. And by the power of math, if we were to draw it all out, we would do 9.6 divided by 2.6. We would get about 3.7 times. So comparing United States to Mexico, the average ecological footprint per person is about 3.7 times more in the United States than in Mexico. Number 3 is a challenge question. It says that China has a smaller ecological footprint per person than the United Kingdom, but a much larger total ecological footprint. So if we take a peek, we see that the United Kingdom has 5.6 on average per person, and China has 1.6. But the total ecological footprint in the UK is 333 million, and China has 2,152 million. So why would you think that China has a larger total ecological footprint, but a smaller per person than the United Kingdom? Well, if we remember our sizes of this country, we know that the United Kingdom is like that big, and China is like that big. So the per person might be smaller, but it is multiplied over a larger population. So more people live in China than they do in the United Kingdom. That's about it. While we cannot avoid using resources, there are better ways to use them. Resource conservation is the practice of managing the use of resources wisely so the resources last longer. Conservation cannot make resources last forever, but it can make resources last longer. Governments and industries greatly affect resource conservation. Even individuals can make a difference. Walking, riding a bike, or riding the bus conserves fuel resources. People can also conserve resources when they turn off lights and unplug equipment that they are not using. Taking shorter showers saves water. When many people make small changes, the results can be huge. Boom. That is it. That is all for this lesson. When we meet again on Monday, we're going to do lesson 3.3, and we're going to learn about, what are we going to learn about? Come on. We're going to learn about human population growth. Oh, that sounds like so much fun. Awesome. So this video is done. Science is done for the week. Go work on your worksheet, and I will see you on Monday or tomorrow for social studies. Bye!